Imagine holding in your hand a small piece of American history, a coin that has traveled through decades, carrying with it stories of an entire nation. The Jefferson nickel of 1972 may look like an ordinary 5-cent piece to many, but to collectors, historians and coin enthusiasts, it represents an era of American coinage design, minting practices, and the enduring legacy of Thomas Jefferson himself. To understand the full history of the 1972 Jefferson nickel, we must first go back to the roots of the Jefferson nickel itself and trace the journey from its creation in 1938 through the changing decades until we reach the year 1972, a year marked by a fascinating chapter in the history of this coin. The Jefferson nickel was introduced in 1938, replacing the beloved Buffalo nickel that had been in circulation since 1913. The Buffalo nickel was a bold, artistic design, but it presented difficulties in striking details clearly and maintaining dies over years of heavy use. The United States Mint held a design competition in 1938, and the winner was Felix Schlag, a German-born American sculptor. Schlag's design honored Thomas Jefferson, the third President of the United States and author of the Declaration of Independence. The obverse, or front of the coin, featured a left-facing portrait of Jefferson, while the reverse displayed Jefferson's Virginia home, Monticello, a neoclassical masterpiece of architecture. From the moment it was introduced, the Jefferson nickel became a cornerstone of American coinage, and it carried immense symbolism. Jefferson was a figure of enlightenment, philosophy, liberty, and leadership, and Monticello represented innovation and vision, both in design and in the spirit of the young American republic. Through the decades, the Jefferson nickel went through wartime changes, most notably between 1942 and 1945, when silver was added to the alloy. Because of the demand for nickel metal during World War II, after the war in 1946, the coin returned to its standard composition of 75% copper and 25% nickel. By the time we reached 1972, the Jefferson nickel had already been circulating for 34 years. It had endured multiple presidencies, shifts in culture and economy, and it continued to be struck at 3 different mints: the Philadelphia Mint, the Denver Mint, and the San Francisco Mint. 1972 was an interesting year, because the Jefferson nickel was still struck with Felix Schlag's original design, though with slight modifications that had been made in the early 40s to improve the clarity of lettering and details on Monticello. The coins of this year carry the familiar Jefferson portrait on the obverse with the motto, "In God We Trust," inscribed to the left of his profile, liberty, and the date to the right, and the mint mark placed to the right of Monticello on the reverse. The 1972 nickel was struck in large numbers, and therefore it is considered common in circulation. However, what makes this year fascinating is not just the numbers struck, but the context of American history at the time, and the small variations and minting quality that collectors today carefully study. 1972 was a time when the nation was going through significant changes. The Vietnam War was ongoing. The Watergate scandal was beginning to brew, and the American economy was facing inflationary pressures. While these events were unfolding every day, Americans still used the Jefferson nickel in their daily purchases. Whether it was buying a cup of coffee, a newspaper, or paying for parking, these nickels passed through the hands of millions, weaving themselves into the economic and cultural fabric of the nation. When we look at mintages, the Philadelphia Mint produced hundreds of millions of nickels in 1972 with no mint mark, while the Denver Mint struck a similar amount. Identified by the small D mint mark on the reverse, the San Francisco Mint, on the other hand, struck proof coins in much smaller quantities. These proof nickels were specially made with polished dies and planchets, producing coins with a mirror-like surface and sharp details. Collectors highly prize these proofs, and in 1972, the San Francisco Mint created both regular proof and what are now called deep cameo proofs, which display strong frosted designs that contrast beautifully against the mirrored background. For collectors today, one of the most important aspects of the 1972 Jefferson nickel is condition coins that were struck in Circulation numbers from Philadelphia and Denver are abundant, but finding one in pristine uncirculated condition with full steps on Monticello is a challenge. The term full steps refers to the details on the steps of Jefferson's Monticello on the reverse. If these steps are fully visible and sharply struck without breaks, the coin becomes significantly more valuable due to the difficulty of achieving such strikes during the minting process. In 1972, many Jefferson nickels, even from fresh dies, failed to produce fully struck steps because of striking pressure and die wear. Thus, collectors seek out those rare examples of 1972 nickels with full steps, whether from Philadelphia or Denver. Coins with 5 or 6 full steps can command impressive premiums in the numismatic market when graded by professional services like PCGS or NGC. Such coins can achieve high mint state grades and represent the pinnacle of Jefferson nickel collecting for that year. The 1972 proof nickels from San Francisco are also noteworthy. The deep cameo varieties, particularly in high grade, are highly sought after and represent a level of craftsmanship and finish that separates them from circulation strikes. These coins are not only treasures for collectors, but also benchmarks in the study of the proof coinage of the United States during the 1970s. We reflect on the history of the 1972 Jefferson nickel. We can also place it within the broader story of American coinage at that time. The U.S. Mint in the 1970s was transitioning toward more modern technology, but still relied heavily on methods that had been in place for decades. Die maintenance, planche preparation, and striking pressure all played roles in the quality of coins minted. That year, errors and varieties from 1972 also intrigue collectors. Missed strikes off center strikes and double die varieties can occasionally be found among Jefferson nickels of this year. Though they are scarce when discovered, they can become valuable. Treasures beyond minting details. The 1972 Jefferson nickel carries cultural significance as well. It reflects a nation that was honoring its past by keeping Jefferson on its coinage, while also moving into an uncertain future. It was a time when Americans could still purchase goods with a handful of coins, yet the value of money was shifting due to inflation. Still, the nickel remained steady as a symbol of small transactions and everyday life. When you hold a 1972 Jefferson nickel, you are holding a coin that bridges generations. A coin that carries the legacy of Felix Schlage's design, the enduring image of Jefferson, and the architectural wonder of Monticello. It is a piece of history that reminds us of where America stood in the early 70s, of the challenges the nation faced, and of the continuity of its currency system through decades of change. Collectors often describe the Jefferson nickel series as one of the most approachable for beginners, while also challenging for advanced numismatists. The 1972 nickel exemplifies this duality, common enough for anyone to find in change, yet with rare varieties, conditions, and full-step designations that make it an exciting pursuit for experts. Whether you are studying its metallurgical composition of 75% copper and 25% nickel, its minting process, its place in the economy, or its cultural role, the 1972 Jefferson nickel offers endless avenues for exploration. The beauty of coins, like the 1972 Jefferson nickel, lies in their ability to tell stories. They are not merely pieces of metal. They are artifacts of a living history. They speak of art, design, politics, economy, and the daily life of a people who use them without giving a second thought. Yet for us today, they are windows into the past. A 2-hour exploration of the 1972 Jefferson nickel reveals just how deep and fascinating the world of numismatics can be, from the origin of the series to the minting details of that specific year, from the proof strikes to the hunt for full-step examples, from its circulation role in a turbulent America to its continuing place in collections worldwide. This coin represents more than its face value. It represents history, heritage, and the timeless human fascination with the things we create and carry with us every day. Imagine holding in your hand a simple 5-cent piece minted in 1974, a coin that millions of people passed through their daily lives, never realizing the fascinating history, the artistry, the economic background, and the small but meaningful changes that made this Jefferson nickel not just money, but a part of American culture and heritage. Welcome to the story of the 1974 Jefferson nickel, a coin that continues the proud legacy of American numismatics and reflects the journey of a nation through its economy, politics, and artistry. To understand the Jefferson nickel of 1974, we must first step back and remember why the Jefferson nickel series was introduced in the first place. In 1938, the United States Mint replaced the Buffalo nickel with a new design honoring Thomas Jefferson, the third president of the United States, and one of the most influential figures in American history. The decision came after a design competition in which Felix Schlag, a German-born American sculptor, submitted. The winning entry, Schlag's design, featured a left-facing portrait of Jefferson on the obverse and Monticello, his Virginia estate, on the reverse, and this design would endure with minor modifications for decades. By the time we reach 1974, the Jefferson nickel had been in circulation for 36 years, and the coin continued to be an essential part of daily commerce. It was struck at 3 different mints: the Philadelphia Mint, the Denver Mint, and the San Francisco Mint. The Philadelphia and Denver facilities produced the regular circulation strikes, while San Francisco issued proof coins for collectors. The 1974 nickel had a mintage running into the hundreds of millions, making it widely available across the country. But even within this enormous production, there are subtleties, differences, and interesting details that make the coin worthy of a deeper look. The obverse design of the 1974 nickel continues to display the portrait of Jefferson. Though over the decades, the detail of Schlag's original artistry had worn down through repeated dye use and slight modifications, Jefferson's features appear bold yet softened compared to earlier strikes. The inscriptions include, "In God, we trust," to the left of the portrait, "Liberty," with the date 1974 to the right, and the mint mark, if present, just to the right of Jefferson's ponytail. The placement of the mint mark in 1974 is a notable detail, because beginning in 1968, the mint mark was moved to the obverse side beneath. The date before that, it had traditionally appeared on the reverse. The reverse of the 1974 nickel still depicts Monticello Jefferson's iconic home in Charlottesville, Virginia. The design shows the neoclassical architecture with its columned front, and central dome beneath the building is the word Monticello, followed by the denomination 5 cents and the country name United States of America. Above the image is the motto E pluribus unum. The design, though simple, carries a stately appearance and has remained a recognizable symbol of American coinage for generations. From a technical perspective, the 1974 Jefferson nickel was struck in a composition of 75% copper and 25% nickel. This metallic makeup had been used since the end of World War II, when the special wartime alloy of silver, manganese, and copper was discontinued. The return to the copper-nickel blend made the coin durable with a silver-like appearance that has allowed nickels to stand the test of time in circulation. The weight of the coin remained at 5 grams with a diameter of 21.2 millimeters and a plain edge, all of which has been consistent throughout most of the Jefferson nickel series. In terms of mintages, the 1974 Philadelphia nickel saw a production of hundreds of millions, while the Denver Mint also struck large numbers, making the coin widely accessible. The San Francisco Mint created proof coins of the highest quality using specially prepared dies and planchets to produce mirror-like fields and frosted devices. These proof coins were intended for collectors and not for general circulation, making them desirable pieces today. The 1970s were an important period for American coinage, and the 1974 nickel must be seen within this context. The country was experiencing economic challenges, inflationary pressures, and changes in daily life. The use of coinage remained central to commerce, vending machines, transit fares, and countless small transactions. The nickel especially played a vital role since it bridged the gap between the penny and higher denominations in daily trade. From a collector's perspective, the 1974 Jefferson nickel might appear common at first glance because of its large mintages, however. Condition rarity plays a huge role. Coins that survive in uncirculated grades, particularly those with sharp strikes and attractive luster, are always of interest-proof versions, especially deep cameo examples from San Francisco are considered premium by collectors. Another fascinating aspect lies in error coins of 1974. As with any large-scale production, mint errors such as off-center strikes, double strikes, die cracks, or planchet flaws exist, and these mistakes can transform a common nickel into a rare collectible commanding much higher value in the numismatic marketplace. The grading of Jefferson nickels, including the 1974 issue, is an area of study in itself. Professional grading companies evaluate strike, sharpness, luster surface, preservation, and overall eye appeal. The highest levels of mint state condition can drastically increase the desirability of a coin. For example, a 1974 nickel graded at MS66 or higher may be far scarcer than its huge mintage. Suggests, due to the difficulty of preserving coins free of contact marks and wear, when examining proof nickels of 1974, collectors pay close attention to cameo and deep cameo contrasts, where the frosted portrait and Monticello stand out sharply. Against the reflective mirror-like fields, the development of this proof quality was a hallmark of San Francisco production in the 1970s, and a deep cameo example from 1974 is highly sought after today. Beyond the numismatic factors, the 1974 nickel is a window into American life. At the time, it was the age of post-Vietnam society. The Watergate scandal was shaking. The political system, inflation was impacting the economy, and the American people were dealing with rapid cultural change. Yet through all this, the Jefferson nickel remained a constant symbol of stability in everyday commerce. To put the 1974 nickel into perspective, within the larger series, it represents a continuation of the long-standing Schlag design, which would remain in place until 2004. When the Westward Journey Nickel series introduced new designs marking the bicentennial of the Lewis and Clark expedition. Thus, the 1974 issue falls within what many collectors call the classic era of Jefferson nickels, an era defined by traditional imagery and widespread use. For the advanced collector varieties of 1974, nickels can offer further intrigue. Die varieties, including repunched mint marks, doubled dies, and other small details are studied carefully by specialists. Some varieties may only be known to a few experts, but they highlight the complexity and craftsmanship involved in minting millions of coins every year. The Jefferson nickel series has long been a favorite for beginning collectors because the coins are affordable, widely available, and historically rich. A complete date and mint mark collection of Jefferson nickels provides a journey through American history from the late 1930s to the modern day, and the 1974 nickel holds its rightful place within. This narrative, while perhaps not rare in absolute numbers, it becomes significant as part of the long continuum of American coinage. As we reflect on the 1974 nickel, we realize that every coin has two stories. One is the technical story of its creation, the dies, the mints, the alloys, the mintages, the grades, and the varieties. The other is the human story of the time period, the hands it passed through, the economic backdrop, the historical events shaping the nation together. These stories make the Jefferson nickel not just a 5-cent piece, but a living artifact of American life. So when you hold a 1974 Jefferson nickel, remember that it is more than spare change. It is a link to Thomas Jefferson, to Felix Schlag, to the mints that produced it, and to the millions of Americans who used it in their daily lives. It is a coin that may seem ordinary, but carries with it extraordinary meaning in the world of numismatics and history, and that is the power of a simple nickel. Have you ever held a small 5-cent piece in your hand and wondered if it carried with it a hidden story, one that goes beyond the everyday exchange of goods and services? one that reveals a piece of American history, artistry, and economic design. The Jefferson nickel of 1975 is one such coin, a coin that on the surface might seem ordinary because millions were struck and used in circulation, but upon deeper exploration, it unfolds into a remarkable journey through numismatic history, minting, practices, and the American spirit that continued to define coinage during the mid-1970s. The 1975 Jefferson nickel belongs to a long line of coins that started in 1938 when the United States Mint decided to replace the Buffalo nickel with a design honoring the third president of the United States, Thomas Jefferson, and the structure most closely associated with him, Monticello, the neoclassical home he designed in Virginia. The nickel design, created by Felix Schlag, became one of the longest running coin designs in American history, and by 1975 it had already been in production for nearly 4 decades through war shortages, minting changes, and countless economic shifts. The year 1975 itself is significant in American numismatic history because it stands right before one of the most important bicentennial celebrations in United States coinage, the bicentennial of 1976, that introduced new quarter, half dollar, and dollar coin designs. However, the Jefferson nickel was not changed. For the bicentennial, instead, it retained its classic Schlag design and continued to be a workhorse coin in circulation. The 1975 nickel thus represents a fascinating point in the timeline. It was a coin bridging the years before the bicentennial, without fanfare, yet maintaining the legacy of Jefferson on the 5-cent piece. In 1975, the nickel was struck at 3 main facilities: Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco. Philadelphia produced the 1975 Jefferson nickels without a mint mark. Denver used the D mint mark, and San Francisco issued proof coins with the S mint mark. These variations are critical to collectors because while millions were struck, not all coins survived in pristine condition. Circulation wear quickly reduced sharpness of design, and many coins ended up lost, damaged, or melted. The proof issues from San Francisco are especially sought after because they were not meant for circulation but for collectors and were struck with polished dies, giving them mirror-like finishes that stand in contrast to regular issues. The composition of the 1975 Jefferson nickel remained the same as it had been since the end of World War II. It was made of a copper-nickel alloy consisting of 75% copper and 25% nickel. This gave it durability and a distinctive silvery appearance. During the war years, the alloy had been temporarily changed to include silver due to wartime shortages. But by 1975, the original copper-nickel formula had long been restored. This composition was chosen not only for its resilience but also for the way it worked in vending machines, which became an increasingly important factor in coin design during the 20th century. From a design perspective, the 1975 Jefferson nickel carried Schlag's classic portrait of Jefferson on the obverse, his profile facing left with the word "Liberty" to the left, the motto, "In God We Trust," and the date, 1975, clearly visible. The reverse showed Monticello, Jefferson's home, with its domed architecture and neoclassical balance. The inscriptions "Monticello e pluribus unum" and "United States of America." 5 cents framed the design. This design had remained largely unchanged since 1938, though over the years slight modifications had been made to improve detail and clarity. Collectors today analyze the 1975 Jefferson nickel, not just for its basic history, but also for the many varieties and errors that arose in its production. The mid-1970s saw high mintages, but also saw instances of striking anomalies, including off-center strikes, weak strikes, and die breaks that created fascinating error coins, which now command significant interest in the numismatic market. Proof nickels from San Francisco in deep cameo condition, where the raised design appears frosty against mirror fields, are particularly desirable and can bring high values when graded by professional services. The coin's historical context adds another layer of richness to its story. America in 1975. was a nation in transition, still healing from the Vietnam War, adjusting to economic pressures of inflation and oil crises, and looking forward to the bicentennial celebration of 1976. Coins, like the 1975 nickel, served not just as currency, but as daily reminders of continuity and tradition. Jefferson's face on the coin reflected ideals of liberty, knowledge, and innovation, which were especially resonant during times of challenge. The nickel was small, yet symbolic, an object of everyday life. Carrying profound meaning for 2 hours, one can trace the path of this coin from its origins in Schlag's winning design in 1938 through the wartime silver nickels of the 1940s into the post-war era of mass circulation and vending machine culture. And finally into the mid-1970s, when the United States Mint continued to strike billions of coins annually. The 1975 Jefferson nickel is a chapter in this evolving narrative, a coin that, despite its abundance, retains importance for collectors, historians, and ordinary Americans who unknowingly carried a piece of that story in their pockets. When examining the 1975 nickel in a professional numismatic context, we must also look at the grading scale used to assess its condition. Coins range from poor and heavily worn to mint state examples with full steps on Monticello, a designation that refers to the clarity of the steps on the building's design. These full-step nickels are highly prized because they demonstrate a strong strike and preservation. From circulation in 1975, full-step examples are scarcer and command premiums because most nickels from that year did not survive with such detail intact. The lasting legacy of the 1975 Jefferson nickel is not that it introduced a dramatic new design or commemorated a historic event, but rather that it quietly carried forward the tradition of Jefferson's place on the nickel as America prepared for its bicentennial. The coin is a reminder that even in years of continuity, coins reflect the values, priorities, and craftsmanship of their time. Collectors treasure it for its varieties, proof issues, and condition rarities, while historians see it as part of a broader narrative of American coinage. So when you hold a 1975 Jefferson nickel in your hand, you are not just holding a small 5-cent piece. You are holding a continuation of a story that began in 1938. You are holding a coin that passed through millions of transactions in an America that was changing rapidly. You are holding a piece of artistry struck in copper and nickel that connected past, present, and future, and you are holding a symbol of Jefferson's enduring legacy on American money. Imagine holding in your hand a simple coin, one that has passed through countless pockets, purses, and cash registers across America, and yet beneath its modest size lies a deep story of history, art, economics, and the enduring legacy of a nation. In 1976, the United States was celebrating its bicentennial 200 years since the Declaration of Independence, a year marked by national pride, parades, fireworks, and a series of commemorative coins minted by the U.S. Mint, including special quarter, half-dollar, and dollar designs that featured unique patriotic themes. But among these widely recognized bicentennial issues, one coin quietly continued its role in circulation, unchanged in its outward appearance, yet deeply tied to the broader story of American numismatics, the Jefferson nickel. The 1976 Jefferson nickel may not bear a special bicentennial design, but its history is intertwined with the period it represents, and to understand its importance we need to go back not just to 1976, but to the very origin of the Jefferson nickel itself and the circumstances that shaped its creation. The Jefferson nickel was first introduced in 1938 as a replacement for the Buffalo nickel, a coin that had been admired for its artistic beauty, but criticized for the difficulties it presented in mass production. The U.S. Mint needed a design that could strike more cleanly, last longer in circulation, and still capture the values of the nation. And so Thomas Jefferson, the third president of the United States, author of the Declaration of Independence, and a central figure in the early republic, was chosen as the portrait to appear on the 5-cent piece on the obverse. The profile of Jefferson was engraved by Felix Schlag, who won the design competition, and on the reverse, Jefferson's iconic home, Monticello, was chosen to represent not just a residence, but a symbol of architecture, intellect, and the ideals of the early nation. By the time we reached 1976, the Jefferson nickel had been in circulation for nearly 4 decades. It had become one of the most familiar coins in American pockets, unchanged in its basic design, since 1938. While other coins were undergoing redesigns or receiving bicentennial treatments, the nickel remained. Constant, its presence almost like a thread connecting Americans of the bicentennial era to those of the Great Depression era. When it was first minted, the 1976 nickel is a fascinating study not because of its rarity in ordinary circulation, but because of its context. It reflects the steadiness of American coinage in a year of great national celebration and change. It was minted in huge quantities by both the Philadelphia and Denver mints, and it also appeared in special collector proof. Sets struck at the San Francisco Mint in those proof versions, with their mirror-like finishes collectors today, still treasure the 1976 nickels as pieces of the bicentennial period, even if they did not carry the bold, special reverse designs of the quarter, half dollar, and dollar. Now, to fully appreciate the 1976 Jefferson nickel, we must also understand the technical and production aspects of the coin. The composition of the nickel at that time remained the traditional alloy of 75% copper and 25% nickel, giving it that distinct silvery color and durability. The coin weighed 5 grams with a diameter of 21.2 millimeters and a plain edge. These specifications had been consistent for decades, but the process of minting them in the bicentennial era carried with it the challenge of meeting extraordinary public demand. Since so many commemorative coins were being struck at the same time, the U.S. Mint needed to maintain balance in producing standard circulating coinage, and the nickel was central to that need. Collectors often ask what makes the 1976 nickel special compared to other dates. The answer lies in the historical connection rather than dramatic design. Change it is a coin of everyday America in a year when patriotism was at its peak. It circulated side by side with bicentennial quarters, half dollars, and Eisenhower dollars coins that drew the spotlight. But the Jefferson nickel quietly did its job, reminding the public of stability and tradition in numismatics. This makes the 1976 nickel significant for those who value the continuity of design and the way it represents Jefferson's enduring role in American history. When we dive deeper into the historical context of 1976, we find layers of meaning. Jefferson himself was the figure who drafted the Declaration of Independence in 1776, and 200 years later, his portrait continued to grace a coin in daily use. The symmetry of this is remarkable. A man who penned the words of freedom was still present on the money exchanged freely across a free nation 2 centuries later. Though Americans may not have paused to consider this, while buying groceries or paying for gas, each time a 1976 nickel passed from hand to hand, it echoed that bicentennial spirit. For collectors, certain varieties of the 1976 nickel add extra interest. While most were struck in standard circulation quality, there are examples from the San Francisco Mint in both proof and special mint sets, and these coins often exhibit deep cameo contrasts, where Jefferson's portrait appears frosted against a mirror background. There are also small differences in strike quality and condition that make high-grade examples particularly valuable today. A 1976 nickel in pristine mint state, with full steps on the Monticello reverse, where the architectural steps are fully defined, is a prize for collectors because it reflects both exceptional minting quality and careful preservation over nearly 50 years. The 1976 Jefferson nickel also belongs to a broader numismatic journey during the 1970s, a time when inflation was rising, the value of metals was being carefully monitored, and the U.S. Mint was constantly evaluating coinage needs. Though the nickel remained stable in composition, its role in commerce was essential, and its circulation numbers reflect that millions upon millions were struck, ensuring that this coin would remain one of the most common sights in the pockets of Americans. The coin is a time capsule of economic history, showing us how the nation managed everyday currency during a turbulent decade. As we look at the legacy of the 1976 nickel, we see that it is more than just a 5-cent piece. It is a link between Jefferson and the bicentennial, a quiet companion to the louder commemorative designs of the year, and a coin that carried forward a design introduced in the late 1930s into the late 20th century. Its story touches art through Schlag's design history, through Jefferson's roll economy, through its production and circulation, and patriotism through its presence during America's bicentennial celebrations. Today, numismatists who study the 1976 Jefferson nickel are not just examining metal, but uncovering a story of America itself. So the next time you see a nickel from 1976, remember that it is not merely a coin, but a piece of history, born in a year of celebration, tied to a president who defined freedom and carried forward by millions of Americans who used it without even thinking about the depth of its meaning. The Jefferson nickel of 1976 is one of those treasures that may appear ordinary, but when studied with care reveals extraordinary layers of value. Imagine holding in your hand a Jefferson nickel from the year 1977, a coin that at first glance looks like any other nickel you might find in your pocket change, but beneath its surface lies a fascinating story of American history, coinage design, economic conditions, and numismatic intrigue. This small 5-cent piece, minted in vast numbers during the late 1970s, carries with it not only the portrait of one of America's most influential founding fathers, but also the legacy of a coin series that had already been circulating for nearly 4 decades by that time. To truly appreciate the 1977 Jefferson nickel, we must travel back to the origins of the series itself, to the year 1938, when the United States Mint held a competition to replace the Buffalo nickel, which had been in circulation for 25 years. The winning design, created by artist Felix Schlag, introduced the now familiar image of Thomas Jefferson on the obverse and Monticello, his iconic Virginia home, on the reverse. The Jefferson nickel quickly became a mainstay of American coinage, and by 1977 it was not just a piece of change, but a symbol of continuity, stability, and national identity. Now, when we look specifically at the 1977 issue, we must place it within the broader historical and economic context of the decade. The 1970s were a turbulent time for the United States, with inflation, economic challenges, and shifting cultural dynamics, and yet the Jefferson nickel maintained its consistent role as one of the most widely used coins in daily commerce. The nickel of 1977 was struck at 3 primary minting facilities: the Philadelphia Mint, which at that time did not use a mint mark, the Denver Mint marked with a D, and the San Francisco Mint, which struck proof coins marked with an S. These 3 mints ensured that millions of Jefferson nickels would enter circulation, meeting the needs of a growing economy, while also providing high-quality collector issues for numismatists. The obverse of the 1977 Jefferson nickel continued to feature the familiar left-facing portrait of Thomas Jefferson as envisioned by Schlag decades earlier. Jefferson's hair detail, the sharpness of the lettering, and the clarity of the mottos. "In God we trust." Liberty and the date all varied depending on strike quality and die condition, which today plays a crucial role in how collectors assess the value and rarity of surviving examples. The reverse showcased Monticello, still a centerpiece of American neoclassical architecture and a lasting symbol of Jefferson's vision for the young nation. Coins of 1977 with strong strikes on the steps of Monticello are highly sought after by collectors, since the detail in those steps often wore down quickly. Due to shallow die engraving, in terms of mintage numbers, the Philadelphia Mint produced hundreds of millions of coins. The Denver Mint also struck a similarly vast number, while the San Francisco Mint focused on creating high-quality proof coins. For collector sets, when we combine these figures, we see that the 1977 nickel was not rare in terms of overall availability, but condition rarity comes into play. The higher the grade, the fewer the surviving examples, and that is what makes certain specimens worth far more than face value today. Professional grading services like PCGS and NGC have given us detailed population reports showing that while common circulated pieces hold only minimal value, high-grade uncirculated and proof examples, especially those with deep cameo contrast or flawless luster, can command strong premiums. The search for full-step examples with every line of Monticello's stairs clearly defined has become almost legendary among Jefferson nickel enthusiasts, and the 1977 issue is no exception. Collectors spend years hunting for these high-quality coins, and their rarity drives strong competition in the marketplace. But the story of the 1977 Jefferson nickel does not end with mintage and condition. When we explore its role in circulation, we see how it touched countless lives across the nation in an era before debit cards and mobile payments. Coins were vital for daily transactions. Whether for vending machines, bus fares, or everyday purchases, the nickel represented convenience and stability. Even as the American economy faced inflationary pressures in the 1970s, the 5-cent piece retained its role as an essential part of commerce. This adds a cultural and historical depth to the 1977 nickel, making it more than just a small disc of metal, but rather a window into how Americans lived and spent during that period. Errors and varieties are another fascinating dimension of the 1977 nickel's history, as with any large-scale minting operation. Mistakes occurred, and these minting anomalies can transform an ordinary coin into a prized collectible. Examples include off-center strikes, double dies, clipped planchets, and die cracks. Each of these errors tells a story of the minting process itself and gives us a chance to understand the technical challenges faced by the United States Mint. During that time, dedicated collectors often pay substantial premiums for these rare error coins, and the 1977 Jefferson nickel has its share of known varieties that spark numismatic excitement. To create a full professional history of this coin, we must also connect it to the broader narrative of Jefferson's legacy and the evolution of American coinage. Thomas Jefferson, the third president of the United States, was more than just a statesman. He was a thinker, a philosopher, and a visionary who left his mark on the nation through documents like the Declaration of Independence and his lifelong advocacy for democracy, education, and architecture. His presence on the nickel was no accident. It was a deliberate choice by the Mint to honor a man who helped shape the identity of the Republic. Monticello, on the reverse, further reinforces this personal connection to Jefferson's ideals by featuring the home. He designed himself a monument to intellect, design, and civic virtue. As we continue to explore the 1977 Jefferson nickel, we can discuss its position within the larger span of the series. Stretching from 1938 through modern issues, the nickel of 1977 represents the pre-modern era. Before significant design changes were introduced in the early 2000s, it captures a snapshot of American coinage in its classic form, untouched by modern commemorative updates and unaltered by the later return to Jefferson's more lifelike portrait in 2005. This makes the 1977 nickel a historically pure representation of the mid-20th century coinage tradition for collectors, historians, and everyday Americans alike. The Jefferson nickel of 1977 holds significance beyond its modest face value. It stands as a bridge between tradition and change, between the artistry of the 1930s and the transformations of the modern mint, between the Jeffersonian vision of democracy and the everyday reality of carrying coins in your pocket. This small piece of nickel and copper alloy encapsulates decades of heritage, economic resilience, and the enduring role of coinage in American life. By the time we finish exploring the vast layers of its story, from Its design origins to its mintage details from condition rarity to collector demand from its cultural context to its technical varieties. We realize that the 1977 Jefferson nickel is not just a coin, it is a historical artifact, a collectible treasure, and a piece of America's living heritage. And that is why this coin deserves our attention, for it tells us that history is not only written in books, but also carried in our pockets. Imagine holding in your hand a simple coin, one that might seem ordinary at first glance, a coin that has passed through countless hands, paid for coffee, newspapers, gasoline, and groceries, a coin that represents not just commerce, but also history, culture, and the evolution of American coinage. This coin is the 1980 Jefferson nickel, a piece of money that tells us far more than its 5-cent value could ever suggest. The Jefferson nickel has been in circulation since 1938, and the year 1980 stands as a fascinating chapter in its long journey to understand the story of this coin. We need to go back to the vision behind it, the man it honors, the design that made it iconic, and the time in which the 1980 issues were struck. Thomas Jefferson, the third President of the United States, was not only the author of the Declaration of Independence, but also a visionary thinker, farmer-scientist, and advocate of liberty. His influence on the young republic was so profound that by the 1930s, the United States Mint sought to honor him on a coin. The nickel was chosen, and beginning in 1938, Jefferson replaced the buffalo nickel design that had graced American coinage for a quarter century. The sculptor Felix Schlag designed the Jefferson nickel, presenting Jefferson's portrait on the obverse and his beloved home Monticello on the reverse. By the time we reached 1980, the Jefferson nickel had already been a familiar sight in pockets for over 4 decades. The world had changed since. Its first minting America had seen the Second World War, the Cold War, the Civil Rights Movement, the space race, and the rise of modern technology. Yet through all those years, the Jefferson nickel remained constant as a symbol of stability and tradition. The 1980 issues are particularly interesting because they represent an era in American coinage defined by the challenges of inflation, the modernization of minting technology, and the sheer scale of production that coins required to meet the demands of a growing population. The 1980 Jefferson nickel was struck at 3 major U.S. mints: Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco, Philadelphia coins in 1980 carried no mint mark. As was the custom at the time, Denver nickels bore the D mint mark while San Francisco produced proof issues with the S mint mark. The Philadelphia Mint was the oldest and largest facility producing vast numbers of nickels for circulation, and in 1980, the Philadelphia nickel became one of the most common coins of the decade. The Denver Mint also struck millions, and these coins circulated heavily across the western United States. San Francisco, meanwhile, produced proof nickels in smaller numbers meant not for general commerce, but for collectors and numismatists who valued sharp detailed strikes and mirrored finishes. The 1980 Jefferson nickel weighs 5 grams and is composed of a copper-nickel alloy, 75% copper and 25% nickel. This composition had been standard since 1946 following the end of the wartime silver alloy issues from 1942 to 1945. The diameter is 21.2 millimeters. The edge plane without reading the obverse bears Jefferson's left-facing portrait, and the reverse shows Monticello with the inscriptions E pluribus unum, Monticello 5 cents, United States of America, and Jefferson's name appearing on the obverse alongside the national motto, In God We Trust. The year 1980 itself holds significance in American history. It was a time of political transition, with the election of Ronald Reagan marking a shift in the nation's direction. It was a year of economic struggle. Inflation was high. The energy crisis weighed heavily on American families, and the cost of everyday goods was rising. Yet amidst these struggles, the nickel still served as a workhorse of commerce. Every diner vending, machine bus fare box, and cash register had nickels moving through them, millions upon millions each day. The Jefferson nickel was truly the backbone of small change transactions. From a numismatic perspective, the 1980 nickel offers fascinating insights. Collectors examine differences between the Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco strikes. They study die varieties, small imperfections or differences in design details that can turn an ordinary coin into a rare and valuable collectible. For example, strong strikes where Jefferson's hair details are fully visible and Monticello's steps appear sharp and clear are prized by collectors, especially from the proof issues. These full-step nickels, as they are called, can fetch significant premiums on the market because they demonstrate an exceptional quality of strike that is often lacking in circulation pieces. The production of the 1980 nickel also reveals the technical sophistication of the U.S. Mint. By this time, minting technology had advanced to ensure faster production with higher quality control. Yet despite improvements, the sheer scale of coinage meant imperfections and varieties inevitably slipped through, creating a field of study for dedicated numismatists who catalog every doubling of a letter, every slight misalignment, and every unusual mark that distinguishes one nickel from another in a sea of millions. But the story of the 1980 Jefferson nickel is not just technical, it is also cultural, because when we think about coins, we think about how they connect people across time. A 1980 nickel minted in Philadelphia might have been given as change at a movie theater where someone bought a ticket to watch The Empire Strikes Back, or perhaps used by a child buying candy at a corner store. Maybe a Denver nickel passed through countless toll booths on western highways, or a proof nickel sat safely in a collector's album protected from circulation, waiting to be admired. Decades later, each coin carries with it the human experiences of the time it was struck, and the society it served. Collectors today look back on the 1980 Jefferson nickel with both nostalgia and appreciation. It represents the enduring presence of Jefferson in American coinage. It represents a year of political change and economic challenge. It represents the artistry of Felix Schlag, whose design remained largely unaltered for decades, and it represents the Mint's ability to produce billions of coins that keep the American economy running smoothly, though its face value is only 5 cents. The 1980 nickel embodies layers of history that make it worth far more in memory than in money. As we trace its journey, we realize that the Jefferson nickel is not just a coin, it is a piece of America's story, a reminder of Jefferson's vision, a record of the Mint's craftsmanship, a tool of everyday life, and a collectible that continues to fascinate hobbyists around the world, from its copper-nickel composition to its sharp Monticello. Reverse from its Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco origins to the hands it passed through on its way across America. The 1980 Jefferson nickel is a small object with a large tale, and that tale is one we continue to tell every time we hold it in our hands.